The hand clamped down on her wrist like a vice. Every customer in the diner looked away. Every single one, except the man in the worn flannel shirt. Let me back up 45 minutes. At midnight on a Thursday, the only people left in the Silver Moon Diner were the ones the world had forgotten about. Truck drivers grinding through cross-country halls, nurses decompressing after double shifts, and James Blackwood, 36 years old, 210 pounds of scarred muscle hidden under a faded flannel sitting in the back booth with a $1.50 cup of coffee. He was trying to stretch into a full break. His right shoulder throbbed. Shrapnel from Kandahar buried too deep to remove, waking up every time the weather turned wet. The rain hammered the windows like it had a personal grudge. James rolled the shoulder, winced, and checked his watch. 42 minutes until his overnight security shift at the warehouse district. Before that, he'd done a full morning of medical supply deliveries. Tomorrow, if his body cooperated, he had a weekend handyman job lined up across town. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, $1,200 a month for rent on a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, $300 for utilities, $400 for his 7-year-old daughter Lily's school supplies, dance classes, the things that made her eyes light up, $600 for food and whatever else a growing kid needed, $2,500 a month minimum, just to keep their heads above water, a city engineered to drown people like him. James Blackwood had been a Marine Scout leader. He'd led men through ambushes in the Hindu Kush, held a dying corporal's hand in the back of a helicopter, earned the Bronze Star he kept in a drawer he never opened. None of that translated into a living wage back home. His wife, Catherine, had been the one who managed everything. The finances, the warmth, the belief that things would get better. Then the cancer came, 18 months of watching the strongest person he'd ever known become someone he couldn't save. She died 4 years ago. James had fallen apart for a while after that. A bar fight that landed him in a holding cell overnight. Months of numbness. Then Lily had looked up at him one morning and said, "Daddy, who's going to make my lunch?" And something in him snapped back into place. 2 years of PTSD treatment, regular sessions, coping mechanisms, discipline. He'd rebuilt himself into something functional, if not whole. The diner's night waitress refilled his coffee without being asked. She was young, mid-20s, with honey blonde hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail, and the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested she actually cared about doing the job well. Her name tag said Emma. James had been coming to the Silver Moon for 3 months on his late-night breaks, and he'd noticed things about her, the way she enunciated words a little too, precisely the way she held her posture, like someone who'd been trained to sit at long tables, not serve them. He'd also noticed that she never complained, never checked her phone, never acted like the work was beneath her. Whatever her story was, it wasn't his business. James Blackwood had learned a long time ago that everyone was fighting a war you couldn't see. Her real name was Elena Mercer, and her war was with her own last name. Lennon M. Mercer, 26, Stanford Masters in Product Design, sole heir to the Mercer Technologies empire, a company valued at $47 billion and counting. Her father, Richard Mercer, had built it from a garage in Palo Alto into one of the most powerful tech conglomerates on the planet. Elena could have been running a division. She could have been sitting in corner offices with floor-to-ceiling windows reviewing acquisition targets and sipping single-origin espresso. Instead, she was scraping dried ketchup off a booth seat at 1 o'clock in the morning, and she had never been happier. It wasn't a breakdown, no matter what her father's people whispered. It was a choice. Elena had spent her entire life inside a bubble where every interaction was transactional, where people smiled because of what her name could do for them, where friendship was a strategic alliance and love was a merger proposal. She'd sat in board meetings where men twice her age talked about connecting with everyday users while they couldn't name the price of a gallon of milk. She wanted to know what real life tasted like. The exhaustion, the small kindnesses between strangers, the weight of earning $1 through actual labor. So she told her father she was taking a sabbatical for personal development, dyed her hair a shade darker, adopted a fake name, and found a job at a diner that never made the pages of any food blog. The arrangement worked because of a deal. She'd struck with her father a fierce, stubborn negotiation that had lasted 3 hours and ended with Richard Mercer's grudging agreement. 6 months. She could have her experiment, as he called it, for 6 months. In exchange, she would return to Mercer Technologies afterward and take the VP of product development role he'd been holding for her. She would also check in weekly with Gavin Cross, the head of her father's security detail, though she negotiated that down to text messages rather than physical surveillance. 3 months in, she'd learned more about product design from watching people actually use things, the way a tired trucker struggled with a flimsy coffee lid, the way an elderly woman couldn't read the small print on a receipt, than she'd learned in 2 years of graduate school. She'd also learned what it felt like to be invisible, and she discovered that invisibility was a kind of freedom she'd never known existed. The bell above the diner door chimed at 12:43 a.m. 3 men walked in, and the air in the room changed. The one in front was Derek Sloan, 41 years old, venture capital. The kind of man who turned money into more money through a combination of sharp instincts, sharper elbows, and a complete absence of anything resembling a conscience. His suit cost more than James Blackwood made in a month. His watch cost more than James made in a year. He moved through the world like he owned it, because in most of the rooms he entered, he functionally did. Derek Sloan was also drunk. Not falling down drunk, not slurring his words drunk. The dangerous kind of drunk, the kind where the alcohol stripped away the last thin layer of civility that men like him wore in public, leaving nothing but the raw entitlement underneath. He'd been at a private dinner with investors, 3 bottles of Chateau Margaux, split among 4 men, followed by whiskeys at a lounge that catered to people who thought spending $40 on a cocktail was reasonable. His 2 associates, a broad-shouldered man named Dale and a younger, nervous one named Kyle, had tried to steer him toward a car home. Derek had insisted on coffee first. He did not know that the waitress at the Silver Moon Diner was Elena Mercer. Not yet. "Table for 3, Derek announced, dropping into a booth with the boneless confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Dale and Kyle slid in across from him, exchanging the kind of look that people who work for difficult men learn to exchange without moving their faces. Elena approached with her order pad. "Good evening. What can I get you, coffee?" Derek said, not looking at her. "Black. And make sure it's fresh. Last time I was somewhere like this, they served me something that tasted like it was brewed during the Clinton administration." Dale chuckled. Kyle studied the laminate tabletop. "Coming right up." Elena turned to go. That's when Derek's hand shot out and locked around her wrist. The grip was sudden and hard, the kind that left marks. Elena's order pad clattered to the floor. Her eyes went wide, a flash of genuine shock and fear that she couldn't quite mask behind her practiced composure. "Hold on, sweetheart," Derek said, his voice carrying across the silent diner. "What's the rush? Stay and talk. Pretty girl like you working at dump like this, you must be dying for some real conversation." "Sir, please let go of me," Elena said. Her voice was steady, but James, watching from his booth, could hear the thin edge of strain in it. Don't be like that." Derek pulled her closer, his thumb pressing into the inside of her wrist. "I'm just being friendly. Sit down. Have a drink with us. I'm working. Please let go." Second time she'd asked. "Come on. Let go of me." Third time. Her voice harder now. Louder. The trucker in the corner booth turned a page of his newspaper with exaggerated focus. The elderly couple near the window began gathering their coats. The cook in the back turned up the radio. A classic rock song filled the silence like a bandage over a wound. This was how it always worked. Money talked, power grabbed. Everyone else found somewhere else to look. James Blackwood set his coffee cup down. The ceramic made a small, precise sound against the saucer. He stood, and the movement was slow, deliberate, the way he used to move when approaching an unfamiliar checkpoint. Non-threatening on the surface, absolutely certain underneath. He covered the 3 yards between his booth and Derek's table in 4 unhurried steps, his boots barely making a sound on the cracked linoleum. That's enough, James said. His voice was quiet, conversational, the kind of quiet that made both of Derek's associates shift in their seats. Dale's hand drifted toward his jacket, pocket probably a phone ready to call lawyers or security or both. Kyle looked at the door like he was calculating the distance. Derek looked up. His eyes traveled over James with the practiced assessment of a man who categorized people by net worth. Worn jeans, faded flannel, calloused hands, working boots with the sole starting to separate on the left one. In Derek's mental spreadsheet, James Blackwood didn't even register as a line item. Mind your own business, Hal, Derek said. This doesn't concern you. That's where you're wrong, James replied, his gaze fixed on the place where Derek's fingers pressed into Elena's skin. She asked you 3 times to let go. When a man puts his hands on a woman who doesn't want it, it stops being a private matter. It becomes everyone's concern. He paused. Let the silence do some work. I'm asking you once. Politely. Let her go. The diner held its breath. The refrigerator hummed. Rain hammered the windows. The radio played on some guitar solo that nobody was listening to. Elena looked at James and something complicated moved across her face. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper than both, a kind of recognition, as if she were seeing proof of something she'd been told didn't exist anymore. In her world, people didn't intervene. They calculated, they weighed exposure against advantage, risk against reward. They hired people to handle things. They absolutely did not stand up in a diner at 1 o'clock in the morning and put themselves between a powerful man and a stranger simply because it was right. Derek Sloan's face darkened. The alcohol burned away whatever thin calculation might have told him to back down. Do you have any idea who I am? He said. I could buy and sell you 100 times. I could make one call and you'd never work in this city again. You'd lose your apartment, your car, whatever sad little life you've stitched together. Don't test me. I know exactly what you are, James said, and now there was an edge in his voice, quiet as a knife being drawn from a sheath. You're a man who thinks his bank account makes him untouchable. But right here, right now in this diner, your money doesn't mean a thing. You're going to let go of her wrist. You're going to apologize. And then you're going to leave. Or we're going to have a different kind of Derek made 2 mistakes. The first was looking at James, Blackwood's worn clothes, and seeing weakness. The second was nodding at Dale. Dale started to rise, reaching for James's shoulder with one meaty hand, the kind of gesture that was meant to move a problem out of the way. The movement that followed was so fast and so clean that most people in the diner later said they weren't sure what they'd seen. James pivoted on his left foot. His right hand came up, trapped Dale's reaching arm at the wrist and elbow. A twist, a controlled step, and Dale was face down on the table, his arm locked behind him in a hold that promised serious damage if he moved. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. No wasted motion. No violence beyond what was necessary. Textbook. Kyle had half risen from his seat. James pointed at him with his free hand, a single gesture, index finger extended, calm as pointing out a street sign. Kyle sat back down. Nobody needs to get hurt, James said, his voice still at conversational level. Your friend's fine. Shoulder might be sore in the morning. Nothing's broken. Yet. He looked at Derek. Let her go. Derek released Elena's wrist. She stepped back, cradling it against her chest, red marks already blooming on her skin. James held the lock for 1 more second, then released Dale, who stumbled backward, cursing and clutching his shoulder. James returned to his booth, picked up his coffee, and took a sip as if nothing had happened. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Derek snarled, yanking out his phone. I'm calling the cops. Assault and battery. You're going to jail, and I'm going to make sure you rot there. Go ahead, James said. Everyone here saw you grab her first. That's assault. What I did was defensive intervention on behalf of another person. Any officer worth his badge knows the difference. The police arrived 11 minutes later. Lieutenant Henry Brooks, a 20-year veteran of the force who'd seen every kind of trouble the city had to offer, took statements from everyone present. He knew James by reputation, the Marine who worked 3 jobs, never caused problems, always had his daughter at school on time. The security camera footage was a problem, though. The angle was wrong, and the diner's old neon sign cast a pulsing glare across the frame that washed out the crucial first seconds of the confrontation the moment Derek grabbed Elena. Elena's statement was clear. 2 other customers reluctantly confirmed that Derek had initiated physical contact. "Looks like self-defense to me," Brooks said, closing his notebook. "But Mr. Sloan's insisting on pressing charges. I need you to come to the station, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm sorry," James nodded. "I need to make a call first. My daughter's with a neighbor." "Daddy?" Lily's voice was small and sleep-fuzzy through the phone. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I might be late getting home. Mrs. Ortega will make you breakfast, okay? Be good for her." A pause. "Then did you help someone, Daddy, like when you were a Marine?" James closed his eyes, pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the diner window. "Something like that, baby. Go back to sleep." At the station, Derek was already there with a lawyer who had materialized like a bad omen, an immaculate man in a charcoal suit who spoke in a low, clipped voice about liability damages and teaching certain people their place. But help arrived from an unexpected direction. Andrea Vasquez, 34, the kind of attorney who'd clawed her way through law school on scholarships while raising 2 kids alone, walked into the station at 2:30 in the morning. "I'm Mr. Blackwood's attorney," she announced. A customer at the diner had called her. Andrea did pro bono work for veterans. It was the thing she was most proud of, and it paid nothing, and she would fight anyone who tried to take it from her. Derek's lawyer sized her up, saw the off-the-rack blazer and the scuffed briefcase, and made the same mistake Derek had made with James. He underestimated her. "My client was acting in defense of a third party who was being physically assaulted," Andrea said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Unless your client wants his blood alcohol level from tonight entered into the record alongside the testimony of multiple witnesses, I'd suggest we all take a breath." The charges were held pending investigation. James was released. He went straight to a security shift 3 hours late and worked until dawn. The next morning, everything fell apart. James woke to his phone vibrating like something alive. Someone had posted a video online shot on a phone from an angle that captured only the moment James restrained Dale. No context, no lead-up. No audio of Elena asking Derek to stop. The caption read, "Violent veteran attacks businessman in unprovoked diner assault." The video spread like fire through dry brush. Local news picked it up. Comment sections erupted. By noon, the security company that employed James for overnight shifts called to let him go. "Liability concerns," the manager said, unable to meet his eyes. By evening, his delivery route supervisor suggested he take some time off until this blows over. The property management company he did handyman work for suddenly had no available jobs. In 48 hours, James Blackwood went from 3 jobs to 0. Parents at Lily's school whispered when he showed up for pickup. One mother pulled her daughter away from Lily on the playground. Lily came home confused, asking why her friend wasn't allowed to play with her anymore. James sat at the kitchen table that night after putting Lily to bed, staring at the stack of bills he'd organized by due date. Rent in 12 days. Electric bill past due. Dance class tuition he'd already paid, thank God. He could make it maybe 6 weeks on savings. After that, the math stopped working. He didn't shake. His hands were steady on the table. The PTSD treatment had been working for 2 years. He wasn't the broken man who'd thrown a punch in a bar after Catherine died. He was a father who'd done the right thing and was being punished for it. What Derek Sloan had not known at the diner and what he discovered roughly 8 hours later, when his own assistant sent him a panicked morning briefing, was the identity of the waitress he'd grabbed. He'd been too drunk to recognize her. The plain uniform, the dyed hair, the name tag that said Emma, none of it triggered the mental file he kept on the Mercer family. But when his hangover cleared and the photos from the police report crossed his desk, the floor dropped out from under him. Elena Mercer, Richard Mercer's daughter, the daughter of the man whose company represented 40% of Derek's current fund portfolio, whose cloud infrastructure contract was the centerpiece of his entire quarterly strategy. The panic lasted about 10 seconds. Then the calculation kicked in. Derek Sloan had not built a $200 million venture fund by panicking. He'd built it by controlling narratives. And right now, the narrative needed to be very, very simple. The veteran was unstable, the situation was a misunderstanding, and anyone who said otherwise needed to be silenced. He called his media contacts first. The edited video was already doing its work, but Derek fed it rocket fuel background information on James's PTSD diagnosis, a 6-year-old photo from the bar fight after Catherine's death. No context, just the image of a man being restrained by police captioned in a way that implied a pattern of violence. He called his lawyer second, a civil suit, assault, defamation, emotional distress demanding damages that exceeded what James would earn in a decade. And then he made a quieter call to a private intelligence firm that specialized in personal security assessments, which was a polished way of saying they watched people and documented their vulnerabilities. Within 24 hours, photos appeared on social media. James walking Lily to school, Lily at her dance recital, Lily on the playground shot with a telephoto lens from across the street. The message required no caption. Elena found out about the video from Vivian Cross, her father's head of strategic communications. Vivian, 31, had built her on making problems disappear. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and she sat across from Elena in a Mercer Technologies conference room with a tablet in one hand and an expression that said this was going to be a long conversation. "The man who helped you is being destroyed," Vivian said. "Derek Sloan is using every tool he has, media, legal, surveillance. The veteran's lost all 3 of his jobs. There are photos of his daughter being circulated online, and the narrative in the press is that he's an unstable, violent man who attacked a respected investor." Elena felt something ignite in her chest. Not the cool, strategic anger she'd learned in boardrooms. Something raw. Something that tasted like the greasy coffee at the Silver Moon and smelled like rain on linoleum. "He saved me," Elena said. "He stood up when everyone else looked away, and now they're destroying his life for it." "Yes," Vivian said. "That's exactly what's happening. The question is what you're going to do about it." "I tried. I found him a lawyer already." She had. The night of the incident, before the video went viral, Elena had tracked down Andrea Vasquez through a veterans legal aid network and arranged anonymously for Andrea to represent James. But Derek's legal and media machinery was a steamroller, and Andrea, brilliant as she was one woman with a cluttered office and a caseload that didn't pay. "A lawyer isn't enough," Vivian said. "Sloan is fighting on 5 fronts simultaneously. Legal, media, financial, personal intimidation, and—" She hesitated. "He's also moving on the business side. He's positioning himself to lock in the Mercer Cloud infrastructure contract at the quarterly board meeting. He thinks if he controls that leverage, your father will pressure you to stay quiet." "My father doesn't pressure me to do anything." The conference room door opened and Richard Mercer walked in. At 63, Richard Mercer moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing and who had never in 40 years of business encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through sufficient application of intelligence, capital, and will. He looked at his daughter with eyes that held equal parts concern and frustration. "Enough," he said. "This experiment is over. You're coming home. Gavin will handle your security from now on." Gavin Cross, 34, appeared in the doorway behind Richard. Former Army Special Forces, private security for 7 years. He had the kind of physical presence that made crowded rooms feel less crowded, as if people instinctively gave him space without knowing why. He was also Vivian's older brother, though they shared almost nothing in common except a talent for solving problems and an unwillingness to discuss their childhood. "No," Elena said. Richard blinked. He was not a man accustomed to hearing that word. "I'm not running," Elena continued, "and I'm not letting them destroy James Blackwood for protecting me. He didn't know who I was. He didn't help me because I'm your daughter. He helped me because I was a person who needed help. When is the last time anyone in our world did something simply because it was right? He's a stranger, Elena. 3 jobs, barely making rent. How do you know he didn't? He's a Marine veteran who held his dying wife's hand for 18 months and has never missed a parent-teacher conference while working himself to death to give his daughter a good life. Gavin can confirm that because I know you've already had him investigated." She looked at Gavin. Gavin very slightly nodded. Richard Mercer sat down. "So what do you propose?" he asked. "I propose we fight back, but not your way, not with money, with the truth." The days that followed were the worst of James Blackwood's life. The edited video passed 500,000 views. Local news ran segments with titles like "Diner Altercation Raises," questions about veteran mental health resources, which sounded compassionate and was actually devastating. James' PTSD diagnosis was discussed by talking heads who'd never served a day in uniform. The bar fight photo from 6 years ago was presented without the context that he'd been 3 months past his wife's funeral and deep in a grief he hadn't yet learned to navigate. Andrea filed motions and gathered evidence, but the legal system moved at the speed of bureaucracy while Derek's media campaign moved at the speed of the internet. Derek's attorney sent a formal settlement offer, $50,000, and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The NDA would cover the events at the diner, any statements about Derek Sloan, and buried in the fine print, any future claims by any party related to the incident. $50,000. Enough to cover rent for 2 years. Enough to keep Lily in her school. Enough to start a college fund. James looked at the documents for exactly 3 seconds. Then he tore them in half. "Tell Derek Sloan," he said to Andrea, his voice flat and final, "that he can take his money and his NDA and choke on them." Andrea gathered the pieces. "You know what this means. They're going to escalate. They're already photographing my daughter. How much more can they escalate? You'd be surprised." Andrea paused. "James, I need you to understand something. I will fight this with everything I have. But I'm one lawyer with a practice that runs on coffee and spite. They have a machine. Then we better be tougher than the machine." Andrea looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, then we build our own case. And we start with the fact that Derek Sloan has done this before." She was right. Andrea had been making calls, pulling threads, doing the unglamorous investigative work that wouldn't make anyone's highlight reel. She found Rachel Keene, 29, who'd worked as a bartender at an upscale hotel where Derek was a regular. Rachel had her own story. Hands where they shouldn't have been, propositions that crossed every line, text messages sent after she rejected him that would curdle your stomach. 2 other women came forward privately, willing to provide sworn statements but terrified of going public. "We have a pattern of behavior," Andrea said, spreading documents across her cluttered desk. 3 women, consistent accounts, corroborating evidence. But patterns prove character, not the specific events of that night. We still need hard proof of what happened at the diner. "The security camera footage is useless," Elena said. She'd come to Andrea's office herself, not as the Mercer heiress, but as a witness and a client. "The angle, the neon glare, it doesn't clearly show Derek grabbing me." "Then we need another angle," Andrea said. That other angle came from 2 sources. The first was Marcus Webb, the truck driver who'd been sitting in the corner booth that night hiding behind his newspaper. Marcus had kept quiet because he was a man who'd learned that getting involved in other people's problems rarely ended well for people who looked like him and lived paycheck to paycheck. But his 12-year-old daughter had seen the news coverage. She'd watched the stories calling James Blackwood a violent man. She'd looked at her father and asked why the man who helped the lady was being called a bad person. Marcus couldn't answer her, so he decided to stop being silent. "I saw everything," Marcus said in a recorded statement sitting in Andrea's office with his hands folded on the table, steady as stone. That man Sloan grabbed the waitress hard enough to leave marks. She told him to stop 3 times. 3 times. The veteran gave Sloan every chance to back down before he ever touched anyone. What he did was textbook defensive intervention. I know because I spent 8 years as Shisha military police before I started driving trucks. The second source was something Elena had kept quiet about a prototype she'd been field testing. As part of her product design research, Elena had been wearing a small device clipped to her apron, a Mercer Technologies prototype called the Vox, a wearable audio recorder designed for workplace safety documentation. It was part of a project she'd been developing on her own time, inspired by exactly the kind of situation she'd been observing during her months at the diner. The device recorded continuous audio in a 48-hour loop. It had captured everything. Every word Derek said. Every time Elena asked him to stop. The sound of James's calm voice intervening. The scuffle. All of it in pristine, unedited, time-stamped audio. This changes everything, Andrea said, listening to the playback with her eyes closed. This isn't just evidence for the criminal case. This is evidence of premeditated defamation. They edited the video to remove context that they knew existed. That's not spin, that's fraud. Lieutenant Brooks saw the surveillance photos of Lily and opened an immediate investigation into criminal harassment, stalking, and witness intimidation. The photos had crossed a line that even Derek's lawyers couldn't rationalize. Meanwhile, Gavin Cross was conducting his own investigation, originally on Richard Mercer's orders to find dirt on James Blackwood. Something that would prove the veteran was an opportunist, a con artist, someone angling for a payday. What Gavin found instead was a man who visited his wife's grave every Sunday. A man who'd written a letter to the family of every soldier he'd lost, letters that were still being answered years later. A man who'd never missed a single one of Lily's dance recitals, even when it meant driving across the city between shifts with no sleep. Gavin sat across from Richard in the billionaire's home study, a room that cost more to furnish than James Blackwood would earn in 5 years. "Your daughter is right about him," Gavin said. "Everyone has a price," Richard replied, not looking up from his screens. "Not this one." Sloan offered him $50,000 to sign an NDA. Blackwood tore it up. Sloan's people are photographing his 7-year-old daughter to intimidate him. He hasn't flinched. Gavin paused. "Sir, when is the last time you met someone who couldn't be bought?" Richard Mercer looked up. The question landed somewhere deep in a place he buried under 4 decades of deals and acquisitions, and the unshakable belief that everyone had a price. "What do you recommend?" he asked. "Don't buy him, don't rescue him. Give him a platform to tell the truth, and let the truth do the rest." The Mercer Technologies quarterly board meeting was held on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the incident at the Silver Moon Diner. It was not the product launch gala, not the flashy public event where investors mingled with journalists over champagne. It was the closed-door session where real decisions were made, where contracts were signed or killed, where men like Derek Sloan exercised the leverage they'd spent years accumulating. Derek was there, seated near the head of the table, flanked by his attorneys. He was confident. The civil suit against James was grinding forward. The media narrative was holding. The veteran was broke, unemployed, and 1 bad month away from losing his apartment. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Richard Mercer called the meeting to order. "Before we address the quarterly agenda," Richard said, "there's a matter of board integrity I need to raise." Derek's smile didn't waver. "Of course, Richard. What's on your mind?" 3 weeks ago, one of our board investors physically assaulted my daughter in a public establishment. When a bystander intervened to protect her, that investor launched a coordinated campaign of media manipulation, legal intimidation, and personal surveillance, including photographing a 7-year-old child to destroy the bystander's life and silence witnesses. The smile disappeared. Richard pressed a button on the conference table's control panel. Audio filled the room. Elena's voice asking Derek to let go. Once, twice, three times. Derek slurred aggressive responses. Then James's voice, calm and measured, giving Derek every opportunity to stop. The scuffle, Dale hitting the table, and then Derek's threat. Asterisk, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Asterisk. The recording played for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Nobody in the room breathed. This audio was captured by a Mercer Technologies prototype device, Richard said, and has been authenticated by independent forensic analysts. It is accompanied by a sworn eyewitness statement from a former military police officer who was present and by the testimony of 3 additional women who have experienced similar behavior from Mr. Sloan over the past 4 years. He turned to Derek. Your investment stake in Mercer Technologies is being liquidated effective immediately. Your access to all proprietary systems, data, and facilities is revoked. The cloud infrastructure contract your fund holds is terminated for cause, specifically breach of our corporate conduct standards. Our legal team has forwarded the audio recording witness statements and evidence of your intimidation campaign to the district attorney's office, which has indicated it intends to pursue criminal charges. Derek's lead attorney leaned forward. Richard, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we're past that, Richard said. The door to the conference room opened. Lieutenant Brooks entered with 2 officers. Derek Sloan, Brooks said, his voice cutting through the mahogany and leather hush of the boardroom. You're under arrest for assault, criminal harassment, witness intimidation, and stalking. Please stand up. Derek didn't move. For the first time in his adult life, his money had nothing to say. Brooks waited 3 seconds. Then he walked around the table, and Derek Sloan, venture capitalist power broker man, who had never been told no, was handcuffed in front of the people, whose respect he'd spent his career cultivating. The story broke that afternoon, not as Derek had scripted it, but as it actually happened. Andrea held a press conference outside the courthouse, flanked by Elena and Rachel Keene, who had decided she was done being afraid. The audio recording was released to media outlets. Within 72 hours, 4 more women came forward with accounts of Derek's behavior. His investment firm began hemorrhaging clients. Federal investigators opened inquiries into several of his fund's more opaque transactions. The edited video of James was re-examined and recontextualized by every outlet that had run it. Retractions were published. Apologies were issued, though they felt thin compared to the damage done. Derek Sloan's civil suit against James was dropped. His attorney suddenly had bigger problems to manage. James watched the news coverage from his apartment, Lily curled against his side. On the couch, her small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers. Andrea called that evening. The civil suit is dead. Criminal charges are moving forward against Sloan, not you. And James, I've gotten 3 calls today from companies wanting to hire you. Your name is cleared. James thanked her. He sat in the quiet of his apartment after Lily went to bed, looking at the folded flag on the mantel, the photos of Catherine, the crayon drawings that covered every surface Lily could reach. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not relief exactly. Something closer to the feeling of setting down a weight he'd been carrying for so long, he'd forgotten what his shoulders felt like without it. The knock came the next evening. James opened the door and found Elena Mercer standing in the hallway. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair back in the same ponytail she wore at the diner. She held a foil-covered baking dish. I made lasagna, she said. I should warn you, it's the first one I've ever made. My old housekeeper tried to teach me over a video call. It might be terrible. James stepped aside. Come in. She entered the small apartment, took in the military precision of the organization, the flag, the photos, the evidence of a life maintained through sheer discipline. She set the lasagna on the counter next to the stack of bills arranged by due date and the 3-job schedule still taped to the refrigerator. 2 of the 3 jobs crossed out. I owe you an apology, Elena said. I should have told you who I was that first night. I should have used my resources immediately. Instead, I tried to handle it anonymously through channels the way I was raised to handle everything. By the time I realized that wasn't enough, they'd already... She stopped. You lost your jobs. Your daughter was frightened. That's on me. No, James said. That's on Derek Sloan. What's on you is the audio recording that took him down, and the lawyer who showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning. That was you, wasn't it? Elena didn't deny it. I didn't stand up in that diner because of who you are, James said. I stood up because you needed help, that's all. And I'd do it again tomorrow, for you or for anyone. Lily appeared in the doorway of her room holding a crayon drawing. She'd drawn a figure in a blue shirt standing between a smaller figure and a larger, menacing one. The standing figure had a cape. Is that Daddy, Elena asked? It's anyone who helps, Lily said with the devastating clarity of a 7-year-old. Daddy says everyone can be that person. You just have to choose. Elena looked at the drawing for a long time. 2 weeks later, Richard Mercer asked James to come to his office. Not the corporate headquarters, but his private study, the room where real conversations happen. Gavin was there. So was Elena. Mr. Blackwood, Richard said, I owe you an apology. I assumed you were an opportunist. I had you investigated. I was wrong, and I'm not a man who says that often. You don't owe me anything, James said. I did what anyone should have done. That's precisely the point, Richard replied. Anyone should have. Only you did. He slid a folder across the desk. This isn't charity. It's a job offer. Elena is launching a new division, the Safe Workplace Initiative. It's a comprehensive program for harassment prevention, crisis intervention training, and workplace safety systems. We're going to offer it to every company in our network and eventually to any organization that wants it. We need someone to lead the security and training program, Elena said. Someone who understands de-escalation under pressure. Someone who's been trained in defensive intervention and can teach others. Someone who can walk into a room full of corporate managers and show them what real courage looks like. She paused. Someone who does the right thing when no one's watching and also when everyone is. James opened the folder. The position paid $90,000 a year, full benefits, flexible hours built around a parent's schedule. It was real work, meaningful work, and it was being offered not as a reward for saving the boss's daughter, but because his specific skills, the skills of a Marine Scout leader, a crisis responder, a man who'd learned to manage his own demons through discipline and treatment, were exactly what the program needed. Can I think about it, James asked. Of course, Richard said. He stood, extended his hand, and James shook it. For what it's worth, Mr. Blackwood, I'd be proud to have you as part of this. Not as a favor, as a colleague. After they left, James sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of him. Lily climbed into his lap. Are you going to do it? She asked. What do you think? I think you should do what makes you happy. She thought about it. And helping people makes you happy. James looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. The figure with the cape. Yeah, he said. It does. He started 2 weeks later. The Safe Workplace Initiative launched with Elena as director, James as head of security and intervention training, and Andrea Vasquez as legal counsel. Her passion for justice finally given a platform with resources behind it. Vivian Cross, who had initially wanted to bury the entire story, became the program's fiercest public advocate, channeling her media expertise into awareness campaigns that reached millions. Even Gavin contributed, designing the physical security protocols and vetting the trainers James recruited. The first training session was held at the Silver Moon Diner. James stood before a room of managers, HR professionals, security officers, and workers from a dozen companies, and he taught them not just how to intervene physically, but how to overcome the paralysis that keeps people frozen when they witness injustice. The hardest part isn't the confrontation, he told them. The hardest part is overcoming the voice in your head that says, asterisk, it's not your problem. Mind your own business. Someone else will handle it. Asterisk, but when someone is being hurt and you have the power to stop it, it is your problem. It is your business. It's everyone's business. In the audience, Rachel Keene sat with the other women who'd come forward. They weren't victims anymore. They were advocates sharing their stories so others could recognize the warning signs and find the courage to act. Marcus Webb was there too, the truck driver who'd finally decided that silence was its own kind of failure. He'd brought his daughter. Derek Sloan's trial was a landmark. The audio evidence was irrefutable. The pattern of behavior documented across multiple victims and years painted a picture that no amount of legal maneuvering could erase. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, plus substantial restitution to his victims. His fund collapsed. His name became shorthand for the consequences of believing that wealth placed you above accountability. More importantly, his case became the Safe Workplace Initiative's most powerful teaching tool. Not as a story of punishment, but as a story of what happens when good people stop looking away. 6 months after the night at the Silver Moon Diner, James and Elena stood in a park on a Sunday afternoon, watching Lily learn to ride her bike without training wheels. It had become their weekly tradition, these simple hours, that had nothing to do with Mercer Technologies or training programs or the wider world. They were just three people who'd been brought together by an act of cruelty that became the catalyst for something better. Lily wobbled overcorrected, wobbled again. "She asked me something yesterday," Elena said, holding a thermos of coffee that was significantly better than anything the Silver Moon served. "Yeah." She asked if standing up for people runs in families. James watched his daughter, the fierce concentration on her small face, the refusal to put her feet down. "What did you tell her?" Elena took his hand. "I told her it does now." Lily completed her first full lap of the park path. She threw both arms in the air, the bike swerving wildly, and let out a scream of pure triumph. James and Elena cheered. It was a small thing, a child learning to balance, but it was built on the same foundation as everything else. Trust, courage, and the understanding that falling down was just part of learning to stand up. The Silver Moon Diner still serves coffee at all hours of the night. The neon sign still flickers. The linoleum still creaks. But there's something new by the register, a small frame sign that reads, "This establishment does not tolerate harassment of any kind. We stand up for each other here." And in a small apartment across town, a little less cramped now, with a second bedroom for the drawings that kept multiplying on every wall, a Marine veteran no longer needs 3 jobs to survive. He works one job that matters. He teaches others what he's always known. That dignity isn't something you earn with a paycheck. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. And that sometimes the simplest choice, standing up when everyone else sits down, can change more lives than you'll ever know. James Blackwood never wanted to be a hero. He just refused to be a bystander. And in a world full of people looking away, that made all the difference. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. New stories every week, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when no one expects it. Trust me, the next one is going to leave you speechless.